Before playing Metroid Prime 4, my understanding was that it wasn't exactly the best received. I made a point to not look up any spoilers or watch any videos before playing, so I gathered that only from the thumbnails of the plethora of recommended videos every time that I opened YouTube around its release. I didn't want any input other than what I had already known about the franchise, which, to be totally transparent, wasn't and still isn't a whole lot. Any videos I watched about the story and timeline have long since been forgotten, and I've only personally played the remaster of the first game, so I went in knowing I'd be in the dark on a lot of essential context. Going from the first to the fourth in a franchise, without any supplement in between, usually isn't the recommended way to experience things. But like I said, I wanted to go in as blind as possible, and honestly, I'm very glad I did. I really enjoyed my time with the game, and I don't know if I would have had I filled my brain with all of the negative pre-bias from those 2 thumbs down reviews that cluttered my YouTube feed. It is drastically different from the first, however, and that much is made clear very quickly and very early on in the game. While the first game has you completely alone for the duration of your excursion, 4 has you meeting allies and working alongside them, and even goes so far as to have you completely dependent on them in certain scenarios, and does so surprisingly often. With that, it still tries to strike a balance between new and old, as you have the open desert which connects the different biomes and main areas, rather than it all being interconnected. So the world is a completely unique experience to the first, and if I remember correctly, you meet one of those previously mentioned allies in each of the different biomes, and they support you during your initial time there, each in their own way. So part of each biome is spent alone, isolated and exploring, delivering the exact same feel that the first game gave me. But then the other part is spent with 1, sometimes 2 other characters, seemingly attached to you at the hip as they follow you through the rest of the area. Then once you're back to the desert, comms are back online, so another one of the friends that you made even earlier can call you up on the radio every few minutes to remind you where to go. In some areas, or parts of areas, it does deliver that same sense of exploration and curiosity, finding pathways that you know you'll come back to later after acquiring new gear, stumbling onto puzzles begging to be solved once you have the right ability. Then after that, it gives you basically the opposite experience, with constant communication, support, and as mentioned before, dependency on those characters around you at times. There's old, but there's also new, and very, very different. Once again, comparing it directly to the first game, it is mostly a unique experience, and I wouldn't say I was opposed to it, and that opposition seems to be the general consensus. It felt like it didn't quite fit, at least going from the first to the fourth, so maybe the drastic jump between isolation and constant help isn't as extreme when playing all 4 in a row. Regardless, knowing the modern gaming climate and the context of the development, I guess I can't really say that any of the design choices seem all that out of place. Usually fans of a franchise want said franchise to further develop, to not only reiterate but explore deeper the elements of the franchise that made it so special in the first place. That's the hope, at least. The reality is that as games take longer and cost more to develop, the risks are higher, and doing that, appealing to the core audience that is, which seems like a guaranteed way to have success, isn't always the case. Or at least it's not always enough. Usually that means financially. With higher resource requirements, appealing to only the core audience isn't always enough anymore. Audiences need to grow, and new fans need to be brought in, and perhaps especially so for Metroid Prime 4. From my understanding, it was passed around between multiple studios, and it's kind of a miracle that it even made it to the state that it did and was able to release. With so much invested, time and money, it's more often more likely that the formula will be simplified and made more accessible, because the assumption is that greater accessibility will translate to more sales and a wider audience, or at least a wider potential audience pool. That's at least how I feel after finishing it. It's like the DNA was there at the core, but they put a lot of dressing on top in an effort to make it as accessible for as many people as possible, so anybody could pick up the game and play and have a good enough time, without feeling like they're getting lost or frustrated because they don't know where to go. So they made it more linear, made the areas more contained, reduced backtracking, gave you help in each area, and basically made it so you always have a way to be reminded of where to go next. Yes, it's different, maybe even diluted or oversimplified at times, but I think it still offers enough to be enjoyable for the average fan, which is a category I am not ashamed to put myself in. I am not a hardcore Metroid fan by any metric, nor would I pretend to be, and I'm not even particularly set on my opinions of Metroidvanias as a genre in general either. So I'm not really the person to be speaking on where or how this fits within the franchise or the genre, but I think if you take it out of that comparative context and look at it by itself, completely on its own, you'll find a game that you can have plenty of fun with, and a world that you can spend more than enough time in, that delivers feelings and experiences all across the board of what you might expect from something in the genre, both positive and negative, of course, but still resulting in an overall satisfactory experience. Before it released, when the first gameplay reveal trailers came out, a lot of people were quick to talk smack on the desert, saying it looked like a PS2 game, had terrible resolution, and looked awful compared to other games coming out at the same time. I thought it looked fine. Sure, the desert area is without a doubt the least visually appealing part of the game, but I wasn't playing for the desert. I wasn't spending all my time there, or even a majority of the time there. It's just the in-between when going from one biome to another, and those areas are what I was playing for. Fury Green, which is the dense and lush jungle area that you start in, or the Volt Forge, which is multiple huge towers, each of which can be explored, and you use the motorcycle called the Viola to travel between them. That's just to name a couple locations. Those are the areas that I was spending my time in, and where the majority of the game takes place, so I reckon that everybody who plays the game would be spending the vast majority of their time in those areas, as opposed to the desert. Seldom does the main objective require you to be in the desert, so I didn't really mind all that much. And even more so because the other biomes looked incredible. I loved the vibrance of Fury Green and the ambient glows and higher contrast lighting of the Volt Forge and the Flare Pool. Overall, I thought it looked great, I really do. The moment-to-moment gameplay was solid too. Again, it was significantly more linear than the first, but I wasn't bothered by that as there were still puzzles and secrets all throughout each of the areas, and plenty of paths waiting for me to come back to once I had new abilities. Items in plain sight, but unattainable with the current gear. The combat was smooth and responsive and compared very directly to the first one, and the different abilities were incorporated into the combat as newer enemies were introduced too, making everything gained feel more and more important and impactful as an addition to your arsenal. Also, going back to the desert real quick, even though it wasn't what I was playing for, I did still enjoy it in its own way. I also enjoy collectathons, so after getting through one of the main areas, being able to just cruise around on the Viola and find new items and kind of chill out was nice. It was like a taste of downtime between the different biomes. I'll also admit, on top of my bias for collectathons, I do kind of have a bias for deserts too, and even though it's mostly just a barren wasteland, there is still something appealing about that to me. Not everything has to be a labyrinthian puzzle to be solved, or meticulously crafted or intricately designed. You know, sometimes a desert is just a desert, and I enjoy cruising around and collecting the items scattered throughout it, so it was fun for me. I'm probably in the minority there, but again, I'm looking at it not only from my experience, of course, and my perspective, but also from outside the context of the genre and franchise and just as its own experience for what it was on its own. As I'm writing this script, I still have yet to look up any reviews, and despite the initial hate the desert got, what I imagine is the most controversial part of the game is the allies, the friends you make along the way. I wasn't particularly bothered by their inclusion, although one was a little more annoying and generic in a way than I'd like. He was constantly making little quips, and he felt like he was there to be a comic relief character, but there was no real serious tension to find relief from, so he mostly just felt out of place. You meet a whole cast of characters, each of them very different from each other, and though you do spend time with each of them in the areas that you find them, once you've cleared the area, they go back to the base camp and just hang out there until the end of the game. You can go back and talk to them, but this is just how I play games. In my head, I was on a mission, so I pretty much ignored them once given the option to. Ultimately, they didn't play a large part in the story until the very end, and they didn't have a massive impact on gameplay when looking back at the total playtime either. The vast majority of my playthrough was spent alone, not with any of the allies, So for me, the ratio was good from a gameplay perspective. I would, however, say the opposite from a narrative point of view. Each character gets their introduction, spends some time with you in the area that they're introduced, and then ends up back at the base camp where you can talk to them as often as you'd like, if you'd like. As I mentioned, not that I had anything against the characters, aside from the one, really, but I wasn't really interested in spending my time chatting when I had items to collect and bosses to fight. On top of that, the game doesn't do a great job of portraying the passage of time. You're on an alien planet, so maybe one day lasts 500 hours there, but in terms of the experience, every time I was back in the desert, it looked like it was smack dab in the middle of the day. So how much did I spend with those characters? How much time was I there with them? I don't know. In terms of gameplay, hardly any, and if the passage of time is supposed to be different in-game compared to real life, like how one day in Minecraft or Oblivion is only a couple hours or something in real life, then that wasn't conveyed at all. It looked like no time passed at all, so I'm assuming I interacted with all those characters and accomplished everything that I needed to in less than the span of one day. If I missed something and the time was explained at some point, please let me know in the comments, as I grew more and more confused the more I thought about it. But anyways, fast forward to the end of the game, and spoiler warning here, click away now if you haven't beaten the game yet and don't want to hear how it ends. But at the end, all those side characters sacrifice themselves so you can escape. The assumption is that all of them die so you can live. And the way that it plays out in the cutscenes and the dialogue is as if you've grown extremely close to these characters during the duration of the playthrough. Like you've grown attached to them and built up these meaningful relationships with them as you've collectively gone through the hardships of surviving on this hostile planet. But like I said, I barely talked to any of them outside of what was necessary to progress the main objective. I hadn't built up relationships with any of them. And again, not that I didn't like them, but I didn't have any particularly strong feelings for any of them. Yet it played out as if it were this tragic, emotional gut punch. It literally zooms in on the faces of each character one by one as they say goodbye, preparing mentally and emotionally to sacrifice themselves for you. The actions and the situation itself is very heavy alone, but without significant characterization and lacking any investment from the player, without having built up actual relationships for the player themselves, not the character Samus, but you, the player, it really just felt hollow. It's like the writers assumed each player would spend a lot of time with each of them to make that send-off more meaningful, but that wasn't the case for me. I also appreciate the option in that the game didn't require me to spend more time with those characters if I didn't want to, but again, it resulted in a detriment, at the ending. So I'm left kind of torn, because if they wanted that big emotional payoff, there should have been more characterization, more time spent with each of those characters. But they gave the player the option to not spend time with them. So there was that emotional dissonance in the ending. I feel like I'm rambling now, but I hope that makes sense. It was just this weird disconnect, an artificially emotional send-off that just didn't quite land for me. But I still appreciated the option to play how I wanted. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is a comfortable combination of good and bad, and also kind of confusing. But all in all, it's a game that is pretty easy to enjoy if you let yourself. It's easy to compare it to the first game and say it's a betrayal of the formula, or to restrain it to the limitations of the Metroidvania genre and say it doesn't fit or that it's lost its identity. Or you can just play it. If you haven't started it yet and are planning to, do your best to go in without any specific expectations on the type of experience it should or shouldn't deliver, and just see what it has to offer. I guarantee playing it that way, you'll find more than enough to enjoy. If you have played it, let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure there's tons of content that I missed, and I was far from getting 100% in the game. But after beating it and having such a good time with it, and remembering all the negative thumbnails that I saw closer to its release, I just felt like I had to talk about it and make a video on it. So again, let me know your thoughts, and thank you so much for making it to the end. I do really, really appreciate it. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time.